Hey everybody, Daniel from Spacedock here, and I want to talk about Star Wars Galaxies, which is the tragically ill-fated Star Wars MMORPG that was a big deal back in the early 2000s. I used to play this game a lot back in the day, and I had a great time with it, and I think it had a lot of elements to it that we still haven't recaptured in modern space games. For one thing, it had something called portalized objects, which essentially meant that you could have your crew running around inside of a multi-passenger ship dealing with problems whilst it flew around in a fully rendered space sim dogfight battle outside, which is something that is now aspired towards by games like Elite Dangerous and Star Citizen, and I think it's been kind of oddly forgotten that it was working in 2005 and doing a great job with it. But as well as that, Star Wars Galaxies gave us a lot of great Star Wars ship designs, some of which have survived into the new canon largely thanks to the FFG X-Wing Miniatures board game, but a lot of which have been sadly lost to time, to the point where I actually had a hard time finding footage and evidence of them for this video. So I'm going to get into some of those now because I think some of these deserve a shout out. We'll start out with Starfighters, and first up there is the T-65 Advanced X-Wing, which was essentially a variant of the T-65 which had slightly different gun hardpoints, and most notably narrow rectangular sublight engines rather than the standard circular ones of the T-65. And when the S-foils were closed, these merged into a sort of single vertical column, and when they were extended they would be 4 diagonally oriented lines, which I thought was a great look. Personally, I prefer this to the new canon's take on the T-85 X-Wing, which has strange S-foil alignments that E.C. Henry has talked about in one of his videos. I think if you wanted to have a really high-tech, futuristic-looking X-Wing, this kind of engine design from the old T-65 Advanced was the way to go, because it really did look striking and impressive in the game. Next up we have the Y-Wing Long Probe, which was a version of the Y-Wing that was kind of designed to serve the same sort of function as the Colonial Raptor from Battlestar Galactica, in that it's basically a reconnaissance and sensor platform and a fleet scout vessel designed to jump ahead of battle groups and check out what's going on. It had a slightly different configuration from the normal Y-Wing, with its engine nacelles raised upwards in a kind of Star Trek fashion, and it was just a cool little detail that the Alliance had this slightly different ship as part of its fleet. Just made the whole Navy feel a little bit more textured and specialized, and it had a good name. Y-Wing Long Probe is a very catchy way of describing this kind of ship. Next up we have the TIE Aggressor, which has made it into the FFG Miniatures game, and I think some other elements of the new canon. This is essentially like a TIE technical, like a pickup truck kind of thing. It's got like a gun turret mounted on the back dorsal surface, and its quadanium solar panels are kind of structured in such a way that the turret on the back has a good firing arc in every direction. It's essentially like the Empire's answer to the Second World War's Bolt and Paul Defiant, that kind of thing. It's sort of a rear gun version, a craft built entirely around having a tail gun. And I remember these things being quite annoying in the game because honestly, a tail gun is an effective thing to have, and this was a kind of sensible, multi-role, reliable design for the Empire, which is not normally their way of doing things. But I remember in the game you did need an experimental vessels license to use them, so it was again implying that, you know, the Empire likes to sort of experiment with the idea of having a sensible ship design where the pilot might not die immediately, but they generally tend to forget about that and just carry on building millions of TIE Fighters. Either way, this was an interesting addition to the many TIE Fighters in Star Wars, and I'm glad this one made it into the new canon. Next up we have the TIE Oppressor, which is a strike fighter, which is certainly a cool thing to have in terms of a role, but it does look a bit weird. This one I think maybe would be better without the dorsal solar panel. I like the design of its normal panels on the port and starboard side, but there's something weirdly asymmetrical about it, and the way the dorsal one is like farther back, it just has a strange look to it. I'm not sure if it really works for me, but I will say strike fighters, again, a good idea. Again, a niche not often explored, really, to have that kind of middle ground between a fighter and a bomber. This one hasn't made it into the new canon, but it's maybe something that might be adapted one day. And again, it just adds more texture to the Imperial Navy. Okay, now we're going to get into the interesting stuff, which is the big sort of light corvette gunship type things that high-level players could get access to. These things had fully navigable interiors and decks, and you could run around them and use the gun turrets and everything. And I'm sure Alice is struggling to dig up some ancient footage from 20 years ago from the depths of YouTube so I can show you what this stuff looks like. But first up we'll have the AEG-77 Vigo gunship, which is the Black Sun gunship. This is what you got if you were a neutral or pirate player. Kind of Halo-esque in its styling. It looks like a big gun from far away. It's got a kind of nice sloping aft section and a very reinforced looking bridge tower. I like the big pronged forward prow section. It just looks very sensible and sturdy and kind of dramatic. This one has again been lost to time, and I think it's a shame that this hasn't made its way into the FFG board game, because I remember for a while they were looking for a ship of this size to give to the Scum and Villainy faction in the board game, and they ended up going for the version of the Ghazanti that's used by that guy in Rebels for like 5 minutes. So it's just a brown Ghazanti with crates welded to it. What is rubbish? Come on, we got this thing. You could use this thing. It's so much cooler. I would have loved to see this thing make a return, even if it was just for the board game. Hopefully it'll be dug up at some point for one of the many new canon stories. Next we have possibly my very favourite Star Wars Galaxies ship design, which is the YE4 Imperial gunship, which is essentially kind of like taking the design style of the Lambda shuttle and extrapolating it into like a Corvette, or into something that sort of fills the same role that the Ghazanti class now fills in the new canon. This again has a really striking profile with that vertical fan blade style to it, and it has that big sturdy square secondary hull that kind of channels the Sentinel class landing craft, just with all of these underslung gun turrets on the front of it and everything around. Whenever you saw these ships escorting larger Imperial warships around in the Kessel system and stuff in Galaxies, it was always a very exciting, dramatic sight, because you could see these things from really far away with those big flat panels and the light reflecting off them. Just a gorgeous design, and I wish this one had stuck around, perhaps more than any of the others, because it's just a very believable extrapolation of the existing Imperial design styles to make something that looks really cool. Okay, moving on to the Rebel Alliance's Incom X4, which I think is the least interesting of the large gunship style ships in this game. This is fine. It's just kind of a generic, broad-winged looking light Corvette. I think the dorsal engine section at the back kind of throws off the lines of the ship a little bit and makes it look less sleek than it otherwise would. I like its bridge section with the kind of wide viewports. Overall, it certainly doesn't look bad. It's just not quite as cool as the Vigo or the YE4, I think. This one definitely had a more forward-facing weapons arsenal, and I remember them being quite easy to deal with in the game because they had such a broad dorsal silhouette, and you could get out of the way of their main weapons quite easily, which definitely wasn't the case for the other ones. Okay, next up we've got one that players of the X-Wing Miniatures game will definitely recognise, and that is the VT49 Decimator, which I believe was described by the concept artists for Galaxies as the Empire's answer to the Millennium Falcon. It's essentially what if a ship like the Millennium Falcon was a warship and it was Imperial. So you get this kind of bladed small design, fills the same kind of role as those little tiny multi-gun Corvettes in Homeworld, that kind of thing. Turn fast and tear into fighters quite easily, and made a good centerpiece to a squadron of fighters. You could fully customize the interior of these ships to your own liking in the game, and as you can see, this has the bridge section at the back with the broad window, but then it also has another viewport at the prow, and that was often turned into people's offices or sort of ostentatious throne rooms and stuff because it's kind of observation deck. Just a pretty good looking ship overall. Glad this one made it through. I think the tradition of adapting Galaxies ships should continue, because I really don't want to see these things completely lost, because there's a lot of great work by some folks here that shouldn't be allowed to fall through the cracks. And last up we have one that appeared in The Force Unleashed 2 long after it was in Galaxies, so it made it into at least a different part of Legends, but still hasn't made it into canon, and that's the YKL-37R Nova Courier, which is kind of a Q ship built by Gallifrey, which are the people who make the GR-75, which is the thing that you will remember exploding in every single sequence it appears in Star Wars. However, with the Nova Courier, insisting on bringing this ship into every single battle makes a little bit more sense, because this one actually does have guns. It has an off-center cockpit in the style of the YT-2400 and a kind of sensor pod counterbalancing it on the opposite side. I really like this ship overall. This is very Rebel Alliance in its design style, because it's like clearly got design lineage shared with what we know to be unarmed civilian cargo ships, and yet it's been geared up for fighting, which very much channels this sort of ethos of the Rebel Alliance, and it just looks good. The central bulbous style of the Gallifrey ships is made better by those outrigger cockpit and sensor pods. I even think this could potentially get away with being a hero ship in some kind of Star Wars thing. Certainly if anyone wants to do a Star Wars tabletop RPG session, this would be a great choice. It's just got that kind of Serenity vibe to it. It's very endearing in its kind of pluckiness, and would definitely be a great addition to the new canon. Now, Star Wars Galaxies is sadly long dead. I think there are some emulators that I've not checked out, but either way, I hope this video can keep some of these designs alive in the public eye, at least until some Star Wars creator decides to give them a second wind in the new canon. Now, I know there are a few fighters for Black Sun and stuff that I missed, like the Skik and the Kriznats. I don't know how you pronounce any of those. But if there's any other classic Star Wars Galaxy ships I missed that you want to see covered on Spacedock, do let me know in the comments below. Honestly, I think some of these, like the Nova Courier, could probably manage actual ship breakdowns on the channel, so I may get into that in the future. Either way, kudos to the old concept artists and designers back in the day who made all of these things. They contributed to a really great game. They made stuff that fit perfectly into the world of Star Wars, and I hope their work gets resurrected one day. Thank you all for watching. This is Daniel from Spacedock, signing off. Thank you for watching Spacedock. If you're interested in supporting the channel, please do check out the links on the screen right now or in the description below for our Patreon and channel membership services. Anything you can pledge goes towards improving our team and our equipment and allowing us to put together bigger and more exciting video projects for you guys on the channel.